Hello, my name is Emile Gourieux with STR, and I'm happy to be here with you today to share our latest performance data for luxury hotels. Before we get started, I want to share a quick reminder of what STR does and where our data comes from. STR works with hotels and destinations all over the world to give them the information that they need to make the best business decisions. And our data comes directly from our hotel partners, so it's reliable information right from the source. And most importantly, we always keep individual data completely confidential. We never share data from individual hotels, owners, or brands with anyone. That way we can provide valuable, actionable market level data that benefits everyone. So let's get started with a global view to see how luxury hotels are performing around the world during this crisis. This is year-to-date data as of the end of October, and we can see big RevPAR losses year over year across the globe. On average, this crisis has cut RevPAR in half for luxury hotels. But it's important to note that the main culprit in this drop in RevPAR is a complete lack of demand, and that's led to occupancy declines never seen before. Now, the optimist would say that this exposes a bright side to the data. ADR has remained relatively stable and has even grown in some areas, and by no small amount either. I mean, look at that, 11% rate growth in Central America luxury hotels, 20% rate growth for the Caribbean, and nearly 22% rate growth year over year for luxury hotels in Southern Africa. And again, despite this unprecedented crisis and a complete lack of demand, luxury hotels in North America, Europe, and Northern Africa have kept ADR declines in the single digits. Returning now to occupancy, the good news is that we pretty much hit bottom, and we're now climbing our way back up, even if it is a long and slow climb with some occasional setbacks. China, which was the first country to enter this crisis and the first to start back on that road to recovery, was back up to 67% occupancy a couple of months ago, but that's dipped down slightly again. But it's worth noting that China's occupancy, it had returned to the pre-COVID levels towards the end of summer. And even with this recent dip in demand, this past week's occupancy is really only about 10% lower than it was the same time last year. So that's a great sign. Occupancy growth in most other regions is really starting to stall, though. The US had hit 50% occupancy in mid-August, but it has stalled and dipped slightly the past couple of months. And that's really a sign that summer is over. So with the exception of holiday breaks, occupancy may level out for quite a while, or at least grow very, very slowly until we see a return of business travel, which makes up about 20 to 25% of the overall demand. Now, Canada has done a relatively good job of containing the virus, and occupancy had maintained a steady climb, although we see an even more pronounced dip in occupancy there over the last couple of months. Again, for the same reasons, high season leisure travel has come to an end, and there's just little to no business travel to fill rooms. On the other end of the spectrum, though, we have beach destinations that continue to see occupancy growth. Occupancy in Mexico and the Caribbean continues to climb slowly as more tourists are looking for an escape from this winter weather. All right, so let's narrow our focus now and take a look at what's happening in the US. As of the past Saturday, this past November the 14th, RevPAR for US luxury hotels is exactly 65% lower than it was the same time last year. Now, that's disappointing in a couple of different ways. For one, obviously, that's a real and no one wants to see that. But what's even worse is that the year-over-year drop had eased a bit in late summer, hovering around the mid-50s. But now we're in the winter months again, and we're headed back in the wrong direction. RevPAR for luxury hotels right now is $71. So to put that in another way, imagine you have a 100-room hotel. That means you're making just over $7,000 a night in room revenue. In many cases, that won't even pay your bills. And it's a similar story with occupancy. 31% occupancy this past week is nearly 60% off last year's numbers. U.S. luxury hotels were seeing weekly averages in the high 30s in August, and even briefly surpassed 40% occupancy the week of Labor Day. But that may be the high watermark now, and especially now that we're well into the off season. And as we get into the winter, rates are beginning to fall farther and farther behind last year's number. This last week's ADR for luxury hotels is down 18% year over year. Compare that to August, when luxury rates were only down 7%. So it begs the question, will there be a race to the bottom as hotels cut rates to grab up whatever demand is possible? Looking at occupancy on a daily basis for luxury hotels, it still amazes me and saddens me, frankly, to see how occupancy fell off a cliff in March, all the way down to 10%. When we add in the 2019 trend in red, you can see the normal times at the beginning of the year when 2020 occupancy was virtually the same as 2019, maybe even with a little bit of growth. What's most interesting to me, though, is to look at the natural patterns in that daily data, that heartbeat, so to speak. Look at the 2019 data in red. There are the spikes on the weekends, and then the valleys, of course, that represent Sundays, which are the slowest nights of the week for just about any hotel around the world. And then you can see that midweek bump as well. But now, look at 2020 in blue. January and February show those same patterns. But now, even as occupancy is starting to climb back from single digits in March and April, all that's left of that pattern, that heartbeat, is that weekend spike. Now we're completely missing the midweek business travelers. And it's all weekend leisure right now. Weekday occupancy in October was down 56% year over year, while weekend occupancy was down only 40%. Going back to normal times, October of last year, there was barely an 8-point difference in occupancy between weekdays and weekends. That lead has now grown to 11 points on average for weekends. Similarly, weekday rates were down 18% compared to weekend rates, being down 11%. Again, looking back to normal times, October of last year, there was less than a $12 difference in occupancy between weekdays and weekends. That weekend advantage has now nearly doubled to $22. We know lack of business travel is playing a big part in these shifts, but a complete lack of international travel also has a really big impact. Luxury hotels benefit greatly from international visitors, but that guest pool has dried up in this crisis and has proven very slow to come back so far. And of course, domestic travel, air travel that is, continues to be a really big issue as well. Until travelers are willing to board planes in large numbers, demand is going to continue to suffer. The Transportation Security Administration in the U.S. tracks the number of passengers through their checkpoints, in other words, boarding planes, each week. And we were seeing a really nice, steady increase in air travel for quite a while. But since mid-July, that trend has completely disappeared. On average, there's been a weekly increase of a measly 0.8%, so not even 1% growth. Labor Day weekend saw a nice spike of just over 9%, and those 4 weeks at the end of September and beginning of October saw modest increases in travelers, but now we're back down to negative numbers. And a lot of it, again, has to do with the fact that summer has ended, but it also reflects that continued increase in COVID cases that we're seeing and a feeling of unease about being on a crowded plane for hours at a time. And to make matters worse, most full-service luxury and upper upscale hotels rely heavily on group business. There were fewer than 500,000 group rooms sold in April of this year. Now that number has finally gotten back up, grown by 3 times, but it's still just a fraction of what group business was pre-pandemic. The sad truth is that until we have an effective and widely available vaccine, group business, especially those large conventions, will not return to normal. And as goes group demand, so goes group RevPAR. Even as transient RevPAR has seen a decent comeback from its low point in April, group RevPAR has barely budged in that time. Again, a negative effect of this crisis that hits luxury and upper up hotels harder than the rest. So that's where things stand right now with hotel performance. I do want to switch gears and start looking a little bit to the future for a moment at the pipeline and the hotel performance forecast. Now, naturally, with this crisis being as severe as it has been, a lot of hotel projects have been either put on hold or canceled altogether. So we can expect to see supply growth ease in 2021. And the bulk of projects in the construction phase right now are limited service. But don't let that slide fool you. Looking at the in-construction rooms as a percent of existing supply, luxury is leading the pack. Now, we have to take in consideration that in October, there were still many luxury properties that were temporarily closed due to the crisis. And that is going to inflate that percentage a little bit. But even when you add those closed properties back into the equation, luxury rooms in construction make up more than 9% of existing luxury supply. And where will that new luxury supply be? Well, these are the top markets for number of luxury rooms in construction in the US right now. Nashville continues its supply growth, and there are some other surprises in there as well, like Charlotte and Tampa. But I want you to look at Las Vegas. Just 4 luxury hotels in construction in Las Vegas, but they are going to be giants. More than 5,500 luxury rooms in construction right now for that market. So now on to what everyone really wants to see, right? What does the future hold, and what will the recovery look like? So this is what we're projecting for luxury hotels in the US. And unfortunately, it could be 2025 before RevPAR gets back to those pre-COVID levels. Obviously, 2020 is going to be the valley that we're going to be climbing out of for years to come. But even 2021 RevPAR is predicted to be just over half of what it was in 2019. Now, that's comparable to 2010 performance when RevPAR was $137. The last year RevPAR was lower than that, was lower than 135, was 2009. So it's taken us back a long time. Now, this is how we see recovery shaping up. There'll be essential meetings and small events before Q2 of 2021, and we're assuming that there's going to be gradual improvement in business travel in the first part of 2021, but nothing significant. Right now, we're in the initial phase of the recovery, and that's driven by domestic leisure travel. It's not until the warm weather returns in Q2 of next year that we'll really move into phase 2. We've pushed out our vaccine assumption for the forecast from Q1 to Q3 of 2021. So until then, we're looking at a slow and stuttering recovery. A widely available vaccine in Q3 would really jumpstart a true and sustained recovery, and that's really with the all important group demand and international demand return. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about is consumer sentiment. How are people feeling about travel in the time of COVID? How do we need to start rethinking who our most reachable guests are and how do we reach them? So the most recent survey by Longwoods International and the Miles Partnership shows that in larger and larger numbers, U.S. consumers have continued to change their travel plans from international to domestic and from fly-to destinations to drive-to markets. And many are canceling travel plans completely. This last week, nearly half of all respondents said that they have reduced travel plans in the next 6 months, and 36% have canceled a trip altogether. Nearly 30% have switched from flying to driving, and just about 1 in 5 has changed an international trip to stay domestic. With the rising COVID-19 case numbers, the percent of Americans with travel plans during the holiday season, that is Thanksgiving through New Year, that has declined over the last month. Over half, 53% of travelers are not planning to take a during the upcoming holidays. That's a 3% increase since the last poll. Of course, undertaking a holiday trip, 38% will be traveling by car, and that's a 3% decline, and 17% are planning on flying, a 2% decline. Due to the rise in case numbers, U.S. travelers' confidence has been further dented. 39% of travelers support opening their community to visitors. 47% feel safe dining and shopping locally. But both of these areas have declined from levels surveyed in September and October. While 46% of U.S. travelers do feel safe traveling outside of their community, over a third of Americans are indicating that they don't plan to travel until there's a COVID-19 vaccine widely available. So that's it. It's not exactly a pretty picture, but there are some glimmers of hope here and there. A lot will depend on when a vaccine is widely available, and that will really determine how quickly business travel returns and groups start coming back as well. Only then can we start getting back to anything resembling normal and those pre-COVID levels of occupancy and ADR. Until then, we really have to think creatively about where to find new guests and how to attract them. How do we adapt? How do we survive and eventually thrive? Because I know we can. That's really what makes the hotel industry special. So thank you again for joining me today. Please consider me and the rest of our team here at STR a resource. If you have questions about anything that we've talked about today, please feel free to email me or connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm constantly sharing updates there. So thank you again, stay well, and have a wonderful day.